So welcome everyone to the second talk on our the topic of mindfulness and anxiety, dealing with anxiety habit loops. So last week we looked at what anxiety habit loops are. That whole trigger, behavior, reward, or result kind of loop process. And we mapped out, the invitation was to do an exercise over the week and map out your top anxiety habit loops, the ones that cause us, I guess, the most problems. And we do this by paying attention throughout the day. So it wasn't by, sitting down and thinking about what our anxiety habit loops are, but rather what we notice as we go through the day, what arises as a habit loop that's causing anxiety. And you really can notice. Well, you may notice it retrospectively, right? You may notice, oh, there's anxiety. What just happened? Go, okay, here was what I just did, and here was the trigger. So you may have to trace it back sometimes. But if you're very present for them, you can notice them and map them out. And worrying about the future is a common habit loop, right? There's a trigger, we worry, and we create anxiety. So we map these trigger, behavior, result / reward. So if you haven't mapped those out, the invitation is to do that first before you do what I'm going to talk about today, because it really lays the groundwork for the exercise for this week. So if you haven't mapped out your top anxiety habit loops, I can, I invite you to do that. And there's a little worksheet that we used. It's on the website at payattention.ca. Yeah, so I mapped out a couple. I can give you an example of them. I think I mentioned one last week, and still see it arising as a habit loop around 4 p.m. There's usually a common time as well. You might notice some of your habit loops have a time of the day element to them. 4 o'clock-ish in the afternoon, boredom arises. I go and grab a beer and go watch the news. Is the habit that I noticed, and what arises is shame and anxiety. And you may not notice, so you may get a kind of an immediate kind of relief from the anxiety, right? Oh, the beer tastes good. There might be a sense of some relief, in maybe even some distraction. But so you're really looking at that deeper sense of what arises. Another one that I noticed was a little bit of stress arises in me. And my mind would distract from the stress by starting to build, by planning a building project, some kind of landscaping or a renovation project. And I would just, the mind would start thinking about this project in its mind. So, and that would distract me from the stress. So there's kind of a temporary distraction. So in a way, there's a bit of it can be a sense of relief. But what I also notice is the stress is still there because it hasn't been dealt with. I've simply distracted myself from it. So I can notice that kind of very subtle habit happening. One I noticed from the past, and it came up a couple of weeks ago, again, was impatience. If you've been coming to this group for any amount of time, you know that that's something I worked with for 20 odd years. So impatience would arise, and so that's the trigger. The behavior that arises, a lot of judgmental thoughts would arise. Why are they so slow? Why can't they hurry up? There's kind of an entitlement aspect to it, right? I need to get going, like hurry up, boy. And so that judgmental thoughts would arise, and then shame and anxiety would arise from that. So I noticed that as a habit loop. So if you haven't mapped out these kinds of habit loops in your life, do this first before you move into this week's assignment, home practice, whatever we want to call it. And yeah, you can go onto the website for the worksheet or email me and I'll send it to you. So this week is the second step. Here we're using our mindfulness to notice the results of our behaviors, the results of our actions. And we know this in the body. That's the guided meditation that we did, was just a body awareness. So we're really noticing this in the body. So once you've mapped out your anxiety habit loop, the second step involves paying attention to the felt, embodied, visceral experience of the results of the behavior. So we're really using curiosity and investigation, which is the second factor of enlightenment. We've covered the practice of investigation. We're using that investigation and curiosity in the body to see what the results of the behavior are. So we ask this question: what do I get out of this? You can pose that question to yourself. What do I get out of this? We need to know this in order to change our habits. We need to know what the result is, or the reward, what we're getting out of this behavior. So we ask this question: what do I get out of this? And we're not jumping into the mind to answer the question. We're resting with the question and getting a felt sense of it in the body. What does the behavior feel like in the body when you bring this behavior to mind? So it's just kind of this non-cognitive, non-intellectual, intuitive investigation that we've spoken about as the second factor of enlightenment. And so to do this, you need to really drop all sense that you know. It's curiosity and investigation that leads to wisdom and away from suffering. And mindfulness is key in this, because we're approaching and opening to what is there, rather than to what's happening in our bodies, rather than suppressing or denying what's happening in our bodies in the present moment, including that which doesn't feel comfortable. Right? We're opening to whatever might be there, and particularly if it's perhaps uncomfortable, we're opening to it. As I said in the meditation, we're putting the welcome mat out for whatever is there. So the willingness to turn towards our experience is supported by this curiosity, non-judgmental curiosity. So it's curiosity and investigation are a way to inquire into our body experience in the body. Got a short talk here that from Judson Brewer that I'll play. Okay. Maybe I won't. Here we are.
When I was first...
Okay, let me just share this. So this is a condensed version of a TED Talk that Judson Brewer gave. And he's got a book called Unraveling Anxiety that discusses this same kind of or similar process of exploring habits.
Learning to meditate. The instruction was to simply pay attention to my breath, and when my mind wandered, to bring it back. The instruction was simple enough but I was missing something really important. So why is it so hard to pay attention? It turns out that we're fighting one of the most evolutionarily conserved learning processes currently known in science. This reward-based learning process is called positive and negative reinforcement, and basically goes like this. We see some food that looks good, calories, survival. We eat the food, we taste it, it tastes good. Our bodies send a signal to our brain that says, remember what you're eating and where you found it. See food, eat food, feel good, repeat. Trigger, behavior, reward. Well, after a while, our creative brains say, next time you feel bad, why don't you try eating something good so you'll feel better? Same process, just a different trigger. Maybe in our teenage years, and we see those rebel kids outside smoking, we think, hey, I want to be cool. So we start smoking. See cool, smoke to be cool, feel good. Now with these same brain processes, we've gone from learning to survive to literally killing ourselves with these habits. In my lab, we studied whether mindfulness training could help people quit smoking. Now with mindfulness training, we focused on being curious. What? Yeah, we said, go ahead and smoke. Just be really curious about what it's like when you do. And what did they notice? Well, here's an example from one of our smokers. She said, mindful smoking smells like stinky cheese and tastes like chemicals. What she discovered just by being curiously aware when she smoked was that smoking tastes like shit. She started to become disenchanted with her behavior. The prefrontal cortex understands that we shouldn't smoke, and it tries its hardest to help us change our behavior. Unfortunately, this is also the first part of our brain that goes offline when we get stressed out. Now, when the prefrontal cortex goes offline, we fall back into our old habits, which is why this disenchantment is so important. Seeing what we get from our habits helps us understand them in a deeper level. But over time, as we learn to see more and more clearly the results of our actions, we let go of old habits and form new ones. Mindfulness is just about being really interested in getting close and personal with what's actually happening in our bodies and minds from moment to moment. And this willingness to turn toward our experience is supported by curiosity, which is naturally rewarding. It feels good. We start to notice that cravings are simply made up of body sensations. Oh, there's tightness, there's tension, there's restlessness, and that these body sensations come and go. This might sound too simplistic to affect behavior, but in one study, we found that mindfulness training was twice as good as gold standard therapy at helping people quit smoking. So it actually works. So if you don't smoke or stress eat, maybe the next time you feel this urge to check your email when you're bored or you're trying to distract yourself from work, see if you can just be curiously aware of what's happening in your body and mind in that moment. Notice the urge, get curious, feel the joy of letting go, and repeat.
Okay, so there's he's talking there about bringing curiosity, the importance of bringing curiosity to these habit loops, and he talks about smoking and other things, but here we're talking about anxiety habit loops that bring us anxiety. So it's this curiosity, you could say it's this kind of bottom up investigation of our experience at the felt level, the felt sense level, not what our minds are saying, not what the prefrontal cortex is perhaps commenting about it. So it's this moment by moment awareness, as opposed to a narrative self-referential storytelling and opinions and judgments that might be arising. So with this, we directly see the cause and effect. What the Buddha talked about in terms of the cause of suffering. We're really taking the second noble truth and looking at it in terms of how the brain works. And if you really dig under what the Buddha was talking about, he was really looking at a way to hack the brain, to figure out, okay, this is what the brain is doing, and this is how it's causing suffering. This is how I can see this, and this is the way out. This is the way out. There's a path that's a way out of this. So we can directly see it. We see, as to quote the Buddha, when this is, that is, from the arising of this comes the arising of that. When this isn't, that isn't. From the cessation of this comes the cessation of that. And you really see how that's what we're looking at when we're looking at our habit loops. When this arises, this happens. The arising of this trigger comes the arising of this. But when that's not present, when I let go of that, there's a cessation of that result. So you can look at curiosity as really being the fundamental aspect of it, and it being a bodily experience. And curiosity feels better than craving. Right? So when we can shift, we can use curiosity to shift from worry to awareness. We're actually shifting from an egoic craving, this craving of the separate self, to a wholeness, to an expansive opening, to awareness. We're shifting to awareness. So when craving arises, we can make the craving our object of curiosity. Folks might remember the wheel of dependent origination, where we talked about how the wheel of suffering is recreated. And here we're breaking that cycle by bringing curiosity to craving or clinging when it arises, so that we don't move to the next spoke or link on that wheel. So really, to put it in sort of the habit behavioral science language, when you bring curiosity to it, you're really updating the information that's forming the habit in order to formulate a new habit. Right? So I started to see, having a beer and watching the news is just making me more stressed out fundamentally. So there's a craving that's arising. I'm just going with the craving, but it's stressing me out. So I bring curiosity. It's just boredom that's present. That's what I'm noticing boredom. And from the boredom, I'm craving this to have something like alcohol and some news to, something to entertain me, but it's actually creating anxiety. So it allowed for a new habit, and I could formulate a new habit. Let's just bring curiosity to this. So I was bringing curiosity. I was actually coming to the body. So what then arose was, I can go and do 30 minutes of yoga and be with the sensations in the body through a practice of yoga. And so that's what it's become a habit now. We actually have a time where my wife and I we do this yoga together later in the day. It's become a new habit, but that can only happen if we see them, right? We see them, and this requires the mindfulness and investigation. So it doesn't require willpower, right? We think we need to combat these habits with willpower, but willpower is setting us up for a lot of egoic struggle and self-judgment, and it just doesn't work. People know smoking's bad for them, and how many times have people tried, right? Using their willpower, and when you fail, you think it's kind of a judgment of failure of your character. Yeah, so we're bringing curiosity. So I'm going to read this. Let me just, before I do that, we bring curiosity and investigation to our habit loops in real time as they're happening. So that's important. And retrospectively. I mentioned this at the outset, but it's important to emphasize both. So it's real time, we can notice them happening, and we can notice, okay, I'm feeling anxious. What just happened? Go back to looking at it after it happened. It works either way. Um, over time, we continually see the results of these old patterns, these anxiety loops. We naturally let them go and we form new ones. So when the meditation teacher 20 years ago said to me, I notice that impatience often arises in you. I said, yeah, you've noticed, eh? And he said, give me an example of when you really feel impatience. I said, well, I'm in a supermarket, they line up. I get really impatient. I try to predict which cashier is going to be the fastest, and I look at how alert they are, if they've had a good night's sleep. Get in that line, and if I make the wrong line, I'll switch lines and I'll just get all agitated. And he said, okay, so what I want you to do is grab an item from the shelf and stand in the longest line. And you don't even have to buy the item, just stand in the longest line and feel in your body what impatience feels like. Just bring curiosity to whatever you're feeling. And I want you to do this every day for a month. Okay. So he was just asking me, and I didn't know this at the time, he was asking me to explore an anxiety habit loop. I was simply trigger, line up in a grocery store, habit, getting having to, impatience arising, right? And anxiety was the result. Bringing curiosity to it just allowed me to sit with it, just be with it. And of course, I went back and reported to him. And I don't think I said quite the right thing because I had to do it for another month. But I got the the hang of it after a while. So it was just letting go of this unhelpful habit loop. It just kind of occurred naturally. So he didn't tell me, go and force yourself not to be impatient. Just impatience, it makes you feel crappy. Just don't be impatient anymore. Just use your willpower. No, who wants to feel anxiety, right? If it was that simple, we would just all say, I'm never going to feel anxious again. But it's not that simple. These are ingrained loops, and the Buddha knew this when he pointed out in the second noble truth, the cause of dukkha. These are highly ingrained habit loops. I want to read one of my favorite stories called Monkeys on the Golf Course. Has anybody heard this one? Monkeys on the Golf Course? Okay, it's one of my favorites. I read it if it even remotely links to the topic at hand, and it does here actually link. So it starts, one of my favorite stories took place a number of decades ago when the English had colonized India and they wanted to set up a golf course in Calcutta. Besides the fact that the English shouldn't have been there in the first place, the golf course was not a particularly good idea. The biggest challenge was that the area was populated with monkeys. The monkeys apparently were interested in golf too, and their way of joining the game was to go onto the golf course and take the balls that the golfers were hitting and toss them around in all directions. Of course, the golfers didn't like this at all, so they tried to control the monkeys. Monkeys, think of controlling thoughts, monkey mind perhaps, or anything. First, they built high fences around the fairway. They went to a lot of trouble to do this. Now monkeys climbed, so they would climb over the fences and onto the course. That solution didn't work well at all. The next thing they tried was to lure the monkeys away from the golf course. I don't know how they tried to lure them, maybe waving bananas or something. But for every monkey that would go for the bananas, all their relatives would come into the golf course to join in the fun. In desperation, they started trapping the monkeys and relocating them, but that didn't work either. The monkeys just had too many relatives who liked to play with golf balls. Finally, they established a novel rule for this particular golf course. The golfers in Calcutta had to play the ball wherever the monkeys dropped it. So if you can figure out the relevance to to letting go and of in habit loops, I'll leave that to you. But I'll open it up. Open it up for questions and comments, and if people have anxiety habit loops that they'd like to share, it's helpful for people to kind of hear how other people have engaged with the assignment as well. And if you have any questions in particular about what our kind of home practice for the week is, let me know that as well.